Okay, our final presenter is Dr. Judy Rose, and Judy's going to present on an AEL research grant that she's led with a multidisciplinary team using phenomenology methods to interview hard-to-reach men who perpetuate domestic violence and coercive control. I'd also like to say if this session is triggering for anybody, you are more than welcome to access some of the support and counselling services that are available to Griffith University staff. I'll pop a link in the chat. Judy, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Beryl, and I'll just check everybody can hear me okay.
You're coming through loud and clear and your slide looks great.
Great. Sorry, I'm sorry, Emma, I put it up. I was just trying to, at the end of your session, kind of avoid any glitches happening. I've had one internet dropout this morning as well. So thank you very much, Beryl, and everyone today and the previous speakers. I've learned a lot from your sessions. Thank you. As Beryl mentioned, our research, the research project that I'm leading is looking at the issue of men who perpetrate domestic violence and coercive control. And I've very deliberately chosen to use phenomenology methods to interview what is a very hard to reach group of people. And I'm hoping today that the presentation might give other education and other scholars who are here today a look into a method that might be applied perhaps to your own research project. I'd be happy to talk about it. I'd also like to begin with an acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to pay particular respect to the Quandamooka people on whose lands I am today. I wanted to mention that I'm very happy we've had a big success in saving Toondah Harbour. It's a campaign I've been involved with for 10 years, working very closely with the Quandamooka people. So I'm very much on a high bubble from that. So extra respect to the Quandamooka owners of that land. Okay, so back to the research project. I thought I'd begin by talking about what do we know about coercive control. I think most people have a fairly good understanding or have heard about domestic violence and domestic and family violence. It filters through whole society. There are children at school who would be experiencing it. But what is this coercive control? So we define coercive control as encompassing repeated patterns of psychological, emotional, financial, and technology-enabled abuse. So the gap in the research around this phenomena or this behaviour is that to date there is quite limited research on men's understanding and use of coercive control, as pointed out by some scholars there. And another issue is that most studies to date have actually focused on the experience of women, victim survivors, understandably. In fact, as we were presenting, I've just heard the publication Rose et al. Is in production. That little thing came in where we look at one woman's experience of coercive control. We wrote a play and performed it at the Domestic Violence Conference a couple of years ago. Importantly too, another gap in the research, and I think this is relevant to all of us in education, is that early education intervention is really crucial to bringing about change and patterns of gender-based abuse. But to date, once again, the effectiveness of what are called men's behaviour change programs is very mixed. There's some uncertainty whether they actually work. So this is for men who have been incarcerated or criminalised in some regard for domestic abuse and are usually referred by police to these male behaviour change programs. And they come in different shapes and sizes. Okay, so back to our particular research project. What we've found working with the facilitator of the Reset Domestic Abuse Program in the Sunshine Coast in Nambour, so we're not talking about fancy Noosa or anything like that. We're talking about more of a hinterland area of the Sunshine Coast where this program was run, where these men are primarily coming from. And what we found with this group, who have been referred by police to the Reset Domestic Violence Education Program, is that they are a very marginalised group in society. So just with that fact, they're very, very hard to reach. They tend to live transitory lives. They move around a lot. They're from fragile families. Their upbringing has involved a lot of early trauma and resultant mental health issues. There are often alcohol and other drug addictions. They've spent time in prison and on parole. And all of the ones that we have interviewed so far have had domestic violence orders, sometimes called DVOs. So this kind of group that we're interested in researching cannot be accessed via convenience sampling or snowballing, the traditional sort of methods that I might have used in the past. So having a gatekeeper or a mediator that these men trust, has been absolutely pivotal to recruitment. So we've gone through the main facilitator that we met at that conference that I mentioned, the Stop Domestic Violence conference. She came to our talk, and she interestingly has a counselling background. So she has been pivotal in contacting the men that we've interviewed so far and setting up the interviews, which have mostly been on site, face-to-face, mostly at night. We've gone to 2 different sites. We've done site visits, sat in and observed as well. And I did do one interview over the phone as the participant had moved to a very remote part of Australia. So really important to researching this hard-to-reach group is also having a research team who have already experienced interviewing vulnerable groups. So that was really important to me. 2 of the team have extensive trauma-informed training. One of them, Menka, wrote the booklet for Griffith University through social work on trauma-informed practice. And so what we do with each other too, and this goes to Beryl's comment, we spend a lot of time with debrief sessions after we do the interviews, so as to avoid what's often called vicarious trauma within the team. So it's like a secondary trauma that we might experience from hearing the stories, which have been pretty grueling. We also, through ethics, of course, provided the men with lots of counselling options to follow up on, the option to have a good break, go out and have a cigarette between interviews, and also because our facilitator is a counselling background, she offers counselling support after the interview and via the delivery of her program anyway, so that's been quite helpful. So with the hard-to-reach group, we knew that we were not going to have a big sample. So far we've completed 6 interviews and hoping to get 1 more, though that one's a little bit uncertain. So this is sort of getting at the issue of why this group are hard to reach, but also has informed my choice of methodology, which I'll talk about next. So before I do go into the choice of methodology, the phenomenology approaches that I've decided to use, I'll just outline what the research questions of the project are. So the first one is, what do men know about coercive control? As the gap shows, we know very little from a male perspective what they know about this idea. Secondly, how do perceptions of masculinity inform men's understandings and use of coercive control? So those of you who attended my lightning talk last year would know that I have long been researching masculinities. So I was interested to see what that connection might be, if there was one. And thirdly, how does education influence men's awareness and behavioural change, if there is any? So they're not really hypotheses, but they're just our research questions directing, where we're going with our research. So I thought I'd turn to phenomenology approaches. I do teach a couple of phenomenology workshops through my role as a Griffith University Research Methods Advisor. So if we go back to the ontology of this methods, and Stephen Hodge, feel free to jump in. I know this is your area as well. We see social reality as subjective. The epistemology of how we do the research, we see that data is co-produced through the researcher and participant through interactions, and for us that is through our interviews. And what we're aiming to do with this method is to understand these participants' life world. It uses interpretive methods that go beyond the surface descriptions to try to reveal deeper meanings that are unique to an individual, so at an individual or idiopathic, sometimes it's called, level. So for us, phenomenology offered a methodology that seems suitable for understanding men's early life history, which we investigate in the first interview, interview 1, exposure to models of masculinity growing up, and thirdly, deeper understandings about what do they know, do they use, coercive control in the context of domestic violence. And we do sort of situate this in the context of the education program that they have been attending. So we have not been particular about when they attended it, whether they dropped out, but just that they had some interaction with this program. One thing I do want to say too is we are not evaluating this program, so that is not the aim of our research. Okay, so a little bit more about the phenomenology approaches that I've dipped into, and I have a bit of a family tree, if you like, of phenomenology here, going right back to Husserl and Heidegger, and branching off to the left to the work of Jonathan Smith and his IPA type of phenomenology, and Max van Manen's hermeneutic phenomenology. And there's aspects of all of these scholars who are also philosophers, if I would argue, approaches that I'm using and have highlighted there in yellow. So I think the slides will be sent out, won't they, Beryl? So people can look at that in more detail. Thanks, Beryl. So what am I interested in here? Well, I do like Jonathan Smith's approach, where he's saying that the phenomenology methodology enables a detailed examination of personal lived experience, so the men's lived experience and how they make sense of it, using an idiographic lens, which is defined down there by Jonathan Smith as how a given person in a given context makes sense of a given situation. This approach also allows space for the essence, and this is terminology from phenomenology, the essence of lived experience to be uncovered, appear, or show itself. So this has been kind of challenging for me in a way, because it takes a lot of patience. It's not a method that you can labour too hard with, and you need to spend quite a lot of time for this to sort of take place, I guess. So there's a lot of working, a lot of reading, a lot of note taking, a lot of thinking, deep thinking in using this method. At this point, I also just wanted to point out what phenomenology is not. So it's not a case study approach, though it is possible to do IPA, for example, on just one person. That has been done. It's not an ethnography, although we very much do acknowledge the social and cultural situatedness of the participant's life. It's not a narrative analysis, although we do ask men, particularly in that first interview, to elicit their life stories, give me a bit about their life history growing up. And importantly, it's not thematic analysis. So it's not an approach that's aiming to generalise your findings to a larger population, as thematic analysis can sometimes do. It's very much about the individual, the idiopathic life experience, rather than the group. So sometimes it just helps to know what a method is not to really understand what it is. So that's why I put that slide in. The method of interviewing with phenomenology is described as dialogical. So it's very much based on an exchange between the interviewer, the researcher, and the interviewee, your participant. And what it really requires it's quite hard work is that the researcher is reflexive right through all stages of the interview, sorry. So you can see in the boxes how this flow, if you like, and reflexivity occurs between the researcher, the participant, and the researcher again. Asking questions, probing for meaning, reflecting on how might the researcher's presence and the interview be affecting what indeed is being researched, all the types of questions being asked. Observing, active listening, using prompts, rephrasing questions, really trying to get at that deepness of lived experience. Typically, I give the option for the men to have the transcript sent to them for checking. That's a checkbox, which not many of them have selected. I think that goes back to their very transient lives. Not all of them have email and that sort of thing. And what the researcher yourself is doing when you're using this method is to look for language that the participants are using, the men are using, that encapsulates that really deep and authentic meaning. And that will come on. We'll certainly be spending more time with that when we get to the point of coding our data, and also be thinking, well, how do the findings that are emerging enrich theory? Okay, so I just wanted to share some insights, and I think this is my last slide, Beryl, so I think that will be good timing-wise. So these are some insights, I guess, I've gained by doing this research. So we're pretty much at the end of our interviews now, ready to move into the next phase of analysis. So what's been really, really important for me is to spend time establishing what I call relationality. So that's not only with the men themselves, but also with the mediator who runs the program and all of her instructors who work with her. So building that rapport and trust with the mediator and participants, conducting site visits prior to interviewing, conducting observations, taking notes of those observations, recording voice memos, have been really, really important to provide the sort of the contextual and situatedness of the interviews. So they're not fly in, fly out interviews by any means. What I've learned, I've done a bit of a sad face there because these have been the challenges, the hard things we've learned by interviewing. So in the pilot phase of interviewing on first phase, to be honest, it was at night. There was a thunderstorm. I'm in a room with a man telling me these stories. I felt a bit scared. But actually, in retrospect, we had the protocol set up. We had the woman in the next room. We knew what to do if there were any issues. So it was fine. I just think it's something about a thunderstorm and doing interviews at night and hearing the story for the first time. What I also learned with that first interview is don't dive in too hard into the coercive control. Talking to a colleague of mine, Summer, she said, I think you might have picked the scab too soon. And what the reaction was in the very first interviews that men tended to blame others. And there is literature to say this can be a trauma response, or it's a phenomenon described as DAVO, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. As we went along, we improved the interview protocol to include a strength-based question, which I can't remember which one of our team members suggested, what are you most proud of? And also we talked about using fictional scenarios. So I tried that, but I found the men thought they were just silly. They just want to tell their own stories, which are much more real and raw than any fictional scenario that I could make up. So that was an experiment. That was worth a try, but didn't really work. What I found did work, so this is the final insights. I realised we're just on time. The first interview, the life story, was really good for establishing, or really, I guess, successful for establishing that rapport and getting a sense of the life world of these men, which is important to phenomenology methods. And prompting the men to tell their stories through dialogic conversation, I feel, has helped to reveal the essence of their life experience. And that meant I had to kind of let go of the interview questions for some of these interviews, just sort of go more into that conversation. I think Poppy talked about the art of conversation. And reflections we had with ourselves was whether it was problematic to have all female interviewers. Ethics and face, in fact, right early on raised that concern. We did ourselves. But what I thought now that I've got to the end of the interview is that seemed to be less important compared to establishing trust, active listening, and guiding the conversation until the essence of experience was revealed. And I think that might be it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Judy. Such topical work, Judy, and they're hard conversations, but they're important nevertheless. So I won't speak to your topic because it's not an area of my expertise, but your method expertise is greatly appreciated. And the whole idea of doing a family tree on a single A4 page as a précis of a whole academic field of practice, I can only imagine the depth and breadth of reading and thinking that you had to do to achieve a family tree of research method. But maybe that's a fabulous Friday afternoon challenge for those of us who are still here within this lightning talk. I'd just like to emphasise that Griffith University has available a new contact point for wellbeing and counselling for staff. It's called Converge International. I have put the link in the chat. It's free access and you don't need any approval, so you don't need to ask anybody if you can access them. Griffith University staff are allowed to make contact themselves, and Converge International keeps a tab of how many hours we've spent and simply bills Griffith University at the end of those processes. So nobody knows who went and they don't know what you went for, but I do want to let you know that you do have a means of support available to you and that you can access that for your well-being.
Thank you, Beryl.
Judy, I think what you've done beautifully there is you've actually summed up the whole theme for today's presentation, and that's the art of communication. We've seen by Poppy's session, which led to today's lightning talks around the art of communication when we give students an opportunity to communicate in authentic ways as part of their assessment. We've heard from Emma about the importance of researchers communicating their demonstrable impact. And then Judy, what you've done is you've shared with us about the art of communication when we're working with hard to reach participants in research studies. So as a literacy educator, I'm going to fly the flag for the importance of communication and the importance of communication for the intellectual work that we do as GIER researchers. So unfortunately, we've come to the time of we've come to the end of our session today. But Judy, would you be receptive to people contacting you if they wanted to know more about your research or about your research methods?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just put my email in the chat.
Thank you, Judy. That's very, very generous. So GIER people, if you could join with me in thanking our wonderful presenters today, Poppy, Emma and Judy. And thanks very much to those of you who came along to share with the great work that's been happening through the GIER.
Thank you, Beryl. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your Friday. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.